Good evening, everyone. We'll get started in a minute. Thanks for coming. I apologize for being a little bit late. I had to take dinner to my mother, and she wouldn't let me leave. She said, "You got to stay and eat." I said, "No, I got a meeting I got to go to." So I got to go and return to my mother's after our session here so that she doesn't think that I'm abandoning her. I'm here this evening with Jim Simmons and John, who's been helping us. We also have Pam and Alexandra, who are our sign language experts for the deaf and hard of hearing, and Emily and Jess, who are working, those who've joining us remotely. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for Mr. Holler. I saw him somewhere. There he is, for allowing us to use your facility, and to those of you at Harlan for the opportunity to be with you. We've been now for the last, 2 or 3 months or more making public presentations. I think we're close to 190 or so. This is our third town hall meeting. We've had them at Pulaski and Warner, and then here, and then Bancroft later in the week. We've been meeting with teachers. Today, I visited both Bancroft and Warner, and was taken around by the teachers. We've also knocked doors in Hedgeville on the west side, and this Saturday around Bancroft on the east side, talking to parents and talking to students. We had some great conversations with some young students there on the east side, and with parents as well. Tonight, Jim is going to present our idea for a learning collaborative, which would basically create an initiative among mostly the 3 school districts, Christina, Brandywine, and Red Clay, with buildings here in the city for preschool, kindergarten, elementary, and middle school students. There is, as you probably know, a commission now looking at broader districting issues and some of the high school issues. We have heard a lot about the high school issue as we've had these public town hall meetings, and that's on our agenda today. So we're here to listen to you, first to present the information about what the Wilmington Learning Collaborative is, and Jim will explain all that, and then take any comments or questions that you have. As I said, we've met with all kinds of groups about and getting their feedback, some of which we've adopted and included in our presentation, and we can talk about that, I'm sure, as we go along. So without further ado, Jim Simmons, who many of you may know, used to work for the Brandywine School District, I think a former principal at Mount Pleasant High School, and a science teacher, math teacher, science teacher at the high school. So, Jim?
Thank you, Governor. And I will say that's the first group that actually applauded when I stood up, so thank you for that again. The last time I got a standing ovation was when Michelle Kutch was cheering for me when I was in high school. We're going to talk about the Wilmington Collaborative and tell you what it is first, and go through some details and take questions. And certainly want to start with, it's exactly what it is, a collaborative. We're here, and we've had a number of meetings to talk about a framework that asks the coalition of the willing, those folks willing to participate with us, to join us to build this together, to get information and input from those people who have boots on the ground, who know exactly what it is that kids, students, teachers actually need. We spend a lot of time doing things for people and to people. We want to make sure we build this with people. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm not sure who has the remote, or do I have it? So here's a number of challenges that people in the room know about, and they're not all of the challenges, but it's some of them. The city of Wilmington is unique in a sense that it's divided by 5 different school districts if we include Newcastle County VOTEC at the high school level, but 4 different districts overseeing the city of Wilmington, and it causes a number of concerns with students who are divided, sent out, and lose that sense of community. I've shared a story about students who live on 30th Street their families move just a block or two away and now have to go to a different school, a different system, different principal. This collaborative, we hope, can address that as one of the issues. We talk about facilities. Buildings don't teach people. However, having buildings that are conducive or environments that are conducive to learning is something that is certainly very, very important. All of those things and others, I'm going to talk about the last one in a second, add to and support the negative parts of education that hinder kids from being successful. Low achievement rates, high absenteeism. The one that I haven't talked about yet, and the next slide will show it, is teacher retention and recruitment. Did she switch yet? So you can see the data behind me. State average says about roughly every 3 years, 66% of the staff will turn over. In our city schools, you can see all of our city schools our retention rates are below the 66%, with some of them close to 30%. What does that mean to the layman, or not even the layman? What does that mean to a principal? Every 3 years, in some buildings, 70% of their staff has turned over. What does that mean to a principal? That means professional development has to be redone every 3 years. Climate and culture in buildings is struggle because you don't have that consistency. What does that mean to parents and students? That siblings don't oftentimes get to say, I want you to have this teacher because they were so good. Well, that teacher's gone by the time your sibling gets there. Parents don't have the ability to go to Mount Pleasant and say, is Mr. Simmons still here? Because every 3 years, Mr. Simmons or someone like Mr. Simmons has moved on. So that teacher recruitment piece is vital. Next slide, please. So what does it look like? We're asking the big three, and we're listing the big three, but we're not excluding anyone. We're asking anyone who has buildings or students that reside in the city if they will partner with us to build this collaborative. And what that looks like is asking them to create memorandums of understanding that will, I'm going to say, allow some authority to be given to this advisory board that will solely focus or hyper-focus on the issues, some of which I just talked about, that are within the city of Wilmington. I want to make sure I say this, and probably I'm going to say it twice. This is not a blame game. This is not pointing a finger. I see Link over there and saying Link and Brandywine School District is not doing. We're not pointing a finger at Christina saying this is what they're not doing. What we're saying is it's a capacity issue. There's tons of things for them to do. They're being pulled in multiple different directions. So what we'd like to do is create this board and a staff that will support them in the things that will help support students. The schools that decide to participate will stay in their district. They won't leave Brandywine School District and go into something different. They're still going to be part of the school district. And then a staff that will oversee the day-to-day operations that reports to that advisory board. Next slide. So what could it look like? I've talked about lots of it. One of the things I didn't talk about is the ability or the option to add in teachers having input into decision making. We had a virtual tour with a number of different schools last Friday that have participated in some kind of version of this, whether it's an innovation zone or empowerment zone. And one of the things that they talked about is having the teachers having input into the decision making made teachers feel like they were part of that community and were willing to stay, which addresses that recruitment and retention piece that we talked about. We talk about extending the school day and doing things different. That does not imply that we want teachers to teach for longer hours. It means bringing in nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations to provide some kind of enrichment that's the interest of those students. It could be bringing in a STEM program that starts not necessarily after school always, but it could be at the end of the day, because we know we certainly have some issues. But that, we're asking families, parents, teachers, students to give us their input into the things that they'd like to see. I said this already, but I want to make sure I emphasize it again. They do not leave their district at all. They stay in the district that they are in. And I think I got everything. Let me talk about this. I want to make sure that I address the small staff and the community base. What we don't see at a high enough level is the engagement of community-based organizations for all of the students that reside in the city. I'll give a couple examples. I met with the executive director at the Powell Center, who apparently has a great relationship here at Harlan, and he's looking to have a relationship with the folks in Christina. But because of proximity, probably, he deals with with Brandywine. United Way has a great partnership with Stubbs. Well, we're suggesting and hoping that if we can get this collaborative built, that those community-based organizations will partner together and focus on the city versus a school district or a portion of a city that's in that district, as in the two examples that I just gave. Next slide, please. Some additional investments. So the most important one that I think is up there is the additional pre-K seats. I think that it's important that we understand if we can send students to kindergarten prepared, then they have a better chance of being successful in reading by third grade. So we're going to invest in the pre-K seats. The other investments could be, depending on how this collaboration works and what things that group come up with, could talk about curriculum, could talk about professional development, supporting staffing. Staffing not only in hiring, but it could be incentives for teachers. We want to work together to figure out how to do that, and we want to do that and not put a burden back on those districts that decide to participate. So we think that that is important. Pre-K, it's not pre-K, I'm going to say elementary wellness centers. We're starting to see those pop up, especially around the social emotional well-being piece. Traditionally for me, wellness centers were at the high school level and they're around medical facilities, getting physicals and that sort of thing. We know that social emotional learning has become a huge piece, and post-pandemic or second round of pandemic, whatever we want to determine this as, social emotional behavioral well-being is becoming a piece. So investing in wellness centers and wraparound services for students at the building level is very important. We think that by doing that and creating those wellness centers, then that support for those students, and I'll say, and for those families, is important. So being able to provide those centers as well. And then I already talked about the executive leadership teams or teachers teams, where we include them in the decision making. Next slide, please. So the governor mentioned some of those things. I think we're on meeting 90 plus that we've been going around, and what I'd say is we're not just going out and presenting, we're going out and gathering feedback so that we can hear from the folks that, again, have boots on the ground. That's important because people want to know that they've been heard. So I've often said to John Sheehan, we should probably start by showing them the first version and then the last version so people can actually see the input that they've had, that we've taken, that we've heard repeatedly. The governor mentioned the high school piece. We know we've got to mention it. We've heard people talk about the timeline. So we met this morning via email to go back and forth about talking about how can we frame that so folks are more comfortable. So we've been going around having these meetings. We've spoken to all three different boards multiple times to gather feedback and information. We're continuing to have these discussions with hopes that their boards will give their superintendents the ability to engage in negotiations. From that, we hope that that negotiation leads to a signing of an MOU so we could begin to plan for what this would look like. And I'm going to say the rollout phase one by the fall, with the understanding that there's going to be lots of other things to the plan that time-wise are going to take a little more time, but we don't want to wait and finish the whole plan as opposed to doing nothing, because those students are still here waiting for our help. Last slide talks about this meeting and others. We had 2 last week. We have 1 today here, and then tomorrow we are at Bancroft. Again, given the opportunity to not only hear about the plan, hear about the options, collect feedback. Again, you can either come in person, you can go online and do a Facebook/YouTube Live. So with that, we're going to take questions. I always give the microphone to the governor. I'll let him field them first, but certainly I'll jump in as we see fit. So before I turn it back to him, I just say thank you for taking the time out of your busy evening. I know how life can get, especially at 6 o'clock when it's dinner time. And to Principal Roberts, who I don't see her in the room right now, great, great idea. We got the kids in the room doing arts and crafts, so what a great idea. So thank you for having us, and great idea. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to the governor, and we'll field questions.
It is a great idea. Thank you for hosting and having parents in and activities for them to occupy themselves. I'm going to take a risk here and recognize folks who I think I recognize. I think the president of the board, John Scrobot, I think that's him behind that mask there in the back. I see Don Patton, I think, from the Christina School Board, Vince Lofink, former Representative Vince Lofink from the State School Board. And I saw Representative Chikoka in the back. Namdi, I think that's you there. So thank you all for coming and everybody else. So we're here to hear from you. So Stacy, you want to start us off?
Sure. I have a question, and I'm not sure how this will fit into what we're trying to do here. First of all, I think this is amazing, and would like to attend more meetings and find out more about it. We talked a little bit, you talked a little bit about some wellness centers and social emotional learning and things of that nature. Just the experience that I've had in the last couple of years with the city of Wilmington and some of our families that are in some very unserved communities, how can we incorporate a little bit more about the definition and how we help families who are transit displaced, homeless, all of the above? Because when we look at the well-being of our families that are displaced, not just talking about what happened recently, but overall, that has a huge effect on how our children learn and how the families stay connected when they're so transit.
So that's one of the most important things that we've heard from parents, teachers, administrators, basically everybody that we've talked to. And first of all, I should note that Stacey Henry has done an incredible job since the big hurricane, and the work that she's done, basically working with families who've been displaced and out of their homes, out of the goodness of their heart. The reality is, in order for those children themselves who are experiencing some kind of homelessness or some kind of trauma in the home, those issues have to be addressed if they're going to learn and if the children around them are going to learn. And so having those additional supports is clearly something that has been a focus of ours in our MOU with the Christina School District, and I expect would be an important part of this. It's what I heard today from the teachers at Warner and at Bancroft. I know that Brandywine provides those kind of supports. I think the key is how do you provide those kinds of supports for things beyond the school building, if you will, that affect the learning of the children in those buildings across the 3 school districts, across arbitrary boundaries that don't mean a lot for our parents and our children. Jim knows that as a former principal, how that affects his leadership in the building in terms of families that move across those boundaries. And we just feel like having this hyper-focus on our Wilmington children and their families and the challenges that they experience. The homelessness today at Warner, the estimate was they have 35 children who are experiencing some kind of homelessness. That number's bigger over in Bancroft, but if we don't address that, those children aren't going to be able to learn, and children aren't them because those challenges come out in the classroom and make it difficult for some of the other children to learn.
I literally have 3 questions. This sounds very good and impacting, but I do have the first question is around the advisory board or committee's team. And for that portion, how are you planning selecting the people for that advisory team? Will they be selected from a community base? Will they be selected from teachers, retired teachers, or what experience will they need? So I'm going to let you answer that question first as to how that advisory committee will be selected and made up to be impacted to the children.
So we don't have all of the details ironed out about who they all would be, but we certainly believe that the superintendent of the district that those schools are in would be on the board. Their board representative that oversees the city would be on that board. We hope to have community members on that board as well. We even got some feedback that should a student be included on that board. So while we have, I'm going to say, a rough sketch or rough outline of who would be on the board, we're still taking feedback on who else should be included. I'm going to turn it over to John for some feedback as well.
Hey, good evening, everyone. John Sheehan with the governor's office. I think you got it right, Jim, and I think really engaging. We've heard suggestions about making sure that there's an educator on the board to bring that perspective, a parent on the board to bring that perspective. And so, you know, I think the challenge is we want to make it as inclusive as possible. Obviously, you still want it to be, you know, sort of tight enough to conduct business. So still working on it, but we want to make it a community-based board of folks who know city schools, know the community, and are known in the community. And if I can just shout out one other person, I see my friend Kobe Owens in the back from the NAACP. Thanks so much for being here.
And then I'm just going to ask one more question so I can give other people a chance. This will be, you're saying high school are exempt, but the question I want to ask is, how will this impact our school taxes? Will this increase the school taxes?
So far, the legislature has been very supportive of our efforts overall and in Christina in particular to this effect. So given some of the future uncertainty on the district in question, we decided that the buildings in that district had to be kind of recapitalized, if you will, invested in, rehab. And so with 100% state funding, meaning not coming from local property taxes, where our plan is to build a new school to replace Bancroft on the east side and to rehab Byard on the west side, which is happening now. That's a significant investment with just state resources, which is an important part of it. Overall, the vast majority of the funding, if not all of it, will come from state revenues. We have a significant commitment to increase what is known as opportunity funding, and that's funding that goes to schools with, based on the number of students that they have from low-income backgrounds and English learners. So if you have X number of students from a disadvantaged background, you get additional dollars, much like Title I in that respect from the federal government, and then English learners as well. We will have additional resources that will go to the collaborative for some of the things that Jim talked about with respect to early childhood. That's another commitment that we've made kind of outside of this framework. But the framework really is a governance framework that really enables us to focus on the needs of city children across kind of arbitrary district lines, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to write one more question. I'm sorry, then you can take the mic. Extended period. You mentioned that you will have longer period for the children. Do you think that's really beneficial? Because children, from psychology perspective, children, they really don't respond positively to longer learning. So explain that portion of it for me where you're thinking about extending the learning hours.
So when I said that earlier, I believe I said enrichment. So for example, enrichment includes extracurricular activities that students already participate in, right? I use my son a lot of times in my examples, because that way I don't have to violate any confidentiality laws. But one of the things I said to my son is a baseball player, and I say he's a little better than average, but when he came to Harlan, he went to Harlan here, he understood fractions because he played baseball. So giving students that enrichment opportunity to add on to the learning that they're getting from their teachers. I don't mean to say class should be 80 minutes versus 120 minutes, meaning giving them extended opportunities. I firmly believe that we have an achievement gap because we have an opportunity gap. We haven't given enough kids the opportunity to be exposed to things that enrich their learning. Doing that with these extended activities gives us a chance to address that.
And that's why we call our new funding mechanism opportunity funding, to focus on that positive. We have a committee that's set up. Darrell Green is the chair of the committee that evaluates how the districts are using the funds up and down the state. Do we have any coming online yet? You can check that in the chat. Yes, ma'am.
I know you said that the retention with teachers was an issue, and I just wonder how you plan on fixing that problem.
So we've had a lot of suggestions. There are actually things in the current MOU we have the Christina School District. I'll let John elaborate on that, but certain incentives we heard today about the possibility of providing, and we do have recently enacted a loan repayment program for teachers that have student loans that they need to repay. There is an additional amount of money that some of the teachers get by virtue of the MOU. John, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and this is something that's come up in a number of the conversations. The governor mentioned some of the additional pay through stipends in the Christina MOU we have. Two other things I'd add. One is that we had an amazing presentation 2 Fridays ago, and I know Superintendent Holler was on, Mr. Scroba was on, Cora Scott was on, and NEA presented to us about shared decision making and this model of including teachers in key decisions as partners with school administration and the impact that it's had in high need schools, in all schools, on teacher retention, because you're empowering educators who are in front of students every day to help make decisions, and it's led to increased student achievement, increased retention, increased in better environments and morale. So that's one sort of tangible additional example. But the other thing that we've been doing, we had a great meeting with Principal Roberts and her team here. And one of the things that we're trying to do is ask educators, both who are in city schools, but also who may have left city schools, what are those things that would have made it so that you could stay? And I think the governor tells a story. We were at a school in Newark, and Blue Ribbon School, Etta Wilson, and we were at a round table with about 12 teachers, all had been there for a number of years, and they all had started in city schools. And so trying to engage folks on the ground, we have ideas, but we want to hear from folks who are in this work every day. What can we do to better support them, to keep them in schools like Harlan?
Okay, we have a question from Facebook. Maddie asks, I'm a teacher at one of the schools that would be a part of the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. If we are going to create smaller class sizes, how will that work? Every classroom in my building is already occupied. Where do we put the extra classes?
So obviously, again, this would be part of the MOU process. We do, in the MOU with Christina, have a class size of 15 to 18, which is pretty significantly below what the statutory requirement is before having a waiver. I think what the question went to a little bit is building logistics, which obviously would have to be incorporated in that as well. If it was the suggestion they didn't have enough classroom, if you need to get additional staff to meet that standard, obviously that would be part of the deal, part of the requirement.
So the question that I do have aligns with retention and recruitment for teachers. Money is always nice to have. However, knowing that it's tough working as an educator, and so I don't know if I missed this piece of it, but have you guys thought about the social or the mental wellness of staff as well as students who will be a part of this community of learning? And then the second piece is there's a shortage of educators across the state as well as nationwide. So retention is great, but recruitment, how are you going to recruit educators into this field with the shortage that is going on?
Goes as best we can is the answer to the last question. That you're exactly right. There's a shortage here in Delaware, and there's shortage nationally, and it's not just teaching. A lot of professions does. as you probably know. I think the best way, and I'll turn it to Jim and John, who actually have classroom experience, the best way to address the emotional needs of teachers is to support them. You know, what I heard today from teachers, and if they have the kind of support, kind of multi-layered support for different challenges that they experience in the classrooms with children that are all experiencing a trauma themselves and bring that to the classroom, is to be able to have that support on other staff that's in the building, and we saw a good example of that. But supporting your teachers and the work that they do in the classroom so that they can focus on that is incredibly important. And the other thing that I heard today from that support staff was professional development or training for the teachers to be able to manage what they can in the classroom as well. It both helps them with their own, headspace, my word, as well as helping the team address the challenges that those children face. I had an amazing conversation. I just feel compelled to share it with a 12-year-old boy who was in 6th grade as we were knocking on doors the other day. His name was Carlos. Apparently 3 or 4 years ago, he barely spoke any English. Well, he spoke as plain English as he could, and he explained from his perspective the challenges that he experienced in his classroom with respect to some of the other things that were going on, which is why he and his mother made some choices as to what to do. But that kind of issue, you may have missed it, but it was the first question that we got right off the top is how to deal with that in classrooms. We're just not going to be able to, the children that are experiencing that trauma aren't going to be able to learn, and the children around them are not going to be able to learn if we don't have that kind of support. John or Jim?
The only other thing I'll add to your question around recruiting and retention is we're certainly working on that in conversations with our institutes of higher learning. We're having ongoing meetings on how we can improve not only getting more people into the field, but removing barriers that hinder people from being in the field, i.e. John Neubauer and his team are working on looking at practice and how that's implemented. Is that a barrier that's stopping folks from entering into the education field? So I think that's a longer answer for how we're going to get more teachers, but if we don't address that, it's not going to go away. One of the other things you mentioned was around how do we support those teachers, and I think it's not only professional development for teachers who are dealing with all the trauma that they're dealing with on their own, supporting the kids, but also professional development for our leaders. When we look at why educators leave the profession, when we did our exit survey, 72% of them say it has to do with leadership. So if in fact that's the case, let's address leadership and provide ongoing professional development for leadership so that they can grow and support those teachers as well, which will help them to stay.
Hi, my kids just moved into this district. We're from PA, but before I did my research on every school around here, the last 5 years, the test scores have been horrible, very horrible. This whole new system you guys got going on, what's going to make a difference? Like, is it really going to be hands-on? Are they really going to care about the kids at this point? Because from what I see from Harlan Elementary, it's a hands-on school, but at the same time, they still need help. They need help. You have children here that are disruptive. You have children here that don't respect the teachers. You have children here that's just too much for the employees. And they can only do so much with these kids because they're not their parents. But at the same time, where's the help that they need? Who's going to bring that in? Is the test scores really going to go up based off of this program that you guys are going to take, which basically y'all into the next school year? That's over. So how are you going to see the improvement from it?
So you're right about the student achievement levels and the proficiency currently, and our commitment, my commitment as governor, is that we need to do a better job. And I see great intentions with everybody. Everybody wants the right thing. I think there are certain pieces that we're missing. And I would say, one, we have to have higher expectations of all our children.
Right.
We know that they can do it, and we've got examples across our state. We've got to create a system where those children can be successful. And the only way they can be successful as I look and listen, into the schools and listen to the teachers, as if we support them just where you're saying, in the classroom, and dealing in a large part with other children in the classroom that have, they're experiencing some kind of trauma that ends up in them acting up and interfering with learning in general and climate. I think I've learned over the last several months that we've been doing this, that expectations, climate, teamwork, and resources are what it takes. Everybody's, I think, well-intended. I don't doubt anybody's intention. The question is, do we have a system where people can be successful and children? We have to have high expectation for our children. It's a very competitive world out there. And if we don't, they're not going to be able to be successful. And I think we have to believe in ourselves that this is something that we can do.
Okay, my next question is, I did a little more research. You guys are sitting on funding and not using it. Y'all have so much funding for school, y'all are not using it at all. It's not fair to these teachers that they're underpaid. It's not fair to the people who just work here, period. Like, what are y'all doing with this funding that's sitting around?
Well, I'm not aware of funding that's sitting around. Happy to talk to you about that. But one of the things that we're attempting to do is obviously to bring more resources. I don't think resources ultimately is the problem. I think it is some of these supports that we've been talking about to address just the type of things that you're talking about in the classroom that interfere with learning. But happy to talk to you if you know of money out there that I don't know of that's sitting around not being used.
Okay, well, that's all I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. And welcome to Delaware.
Do you have one? No.
Anything else on Facebook? Yeah, so the question is, has this worked someplace else? I think John or Jim referred earlier to it, and I'll hand it over to John. But this idea of creating a district like this came from Darrell Green and our team 3 or 4 years ago, because it was something that we had seen that was working in Springfield, Massachusetts. And so we had a big phone presentation by the folks in Springfield and Waco and Fort Worth, Texas, and Denver, Colorado, I think, that are using a model like this. We're adapting it to our circumstance here. I don't think in any of those other districts was it a collaboration among more than one district, but the idea is focusing on the unique educational needs of certain student populations. So yeah, Springfield, Mass. We all went up. In fact, Representative Chicuoco went with us, as I recall, and we saw what looked like a really good model.
The governor got it. There are a number of areas, and what I'd love to do is you can either go to the governor's YouTube page, or I can get your contact information, and I'll send you. We recorded the visit, and you can hear from educators, from school leaders, from school board members in some of these other areas. I think that's probably more powerful than anything I tell you, is hearing from folks who are doing this work on the ground. So I'll give you my card after this.
I have another, it's not really a question. I think it's more of an experience learned working in Harlan, actually. Building relationships. I just remember being a young child in Wilmington, going to school, and how communities build relationships. And not only relationships with, folks coming to meetings like this and the different things that we're doing, but I know just my experience when I worked at Harlan, it was working with the parent, the teacher, the child, and the community. We have to connect the community with our families in order for our education to be successful. There's only so much the teacher can do. There's only so much the principal can do. There's only so much the district can do. But when we go outside the doors of the schools and get into the communities and allow the community to come in to the schools, we're working as a team as opposed to them and us. And these success stories, when I worked here at Harlan, was really about building relationships, even with the children and families that were struggling, because they saw a part of their school that cared about what happened to them when they left school. So, yes, some children and families are challenged because of the challenge that they faced every day. But when we have a component that can connect us all on a daily basis, not once a month, not every semester, but on a daily basis, we get more because we're opening the doors of communication and we're hearing them and they're hearing us.
So the easiest way to respond is amen. I'm a guy who believes in not only building relationships, but I think what's missing is maintaining them. I joked today when you guys clapped about teasing Michelle. Michelle and I went to high school together, and I tell that lie all the time about her cheering for me at football games. It's really true, but she doesn't want to admit it. But I say that because building and maintaining those relationships helps support all those things that you talk about. So that, I'll use a better example. When I was the principal at Mount Pleasant, the guidance counselors were arranged by grade, so that one counselor had 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. I changed it to do it by alphabet. I did that so that we could build and maintain relationships with families for the entire duration that those families were at Mount Pleasant High School. So that if Lisa Lawson is struggling, now when she's a junior, I've already got a relationship with mom or dad or caregiver so that and they have a better level of trust with me to be able to be more comfortable to say, what can we do as a team? Because it takes a village, as you know. And so building and maintaining those relationships is important. You'll start to hear out the districts as I travel, the schools know that as well. I think we got caught up in test scores and what does that mean without understanding that it's not in lieu of those relationships. Those things are important to help move that needle. So I think it's absolutely vital.
Anything else from Facebook as we wait for other comments or questions? Jess? No? So we did have, as people are thinking about the next question or observation, we did have, by the way, a great Zoom with your teachers here. It was really a good conversation, I felt, back and forth. The biggest turnout, I would also add, of anybody that starts with the principal, I'm sure, and we had a really good and productive conversation that evening. As I said, we've had, this is our third town hall meeting. We had one at Pulaski on the west side and at Warner last week. Right. And then we're going to have one at Bancroft later this week.
Governor, I have another question for you from Facebook. What is the national retention average over a 3-year period? You referenced the state average is around 60%, with the City of Wilmington schools being 30%. Is there a difference nationally for urban versus suburban?
I do not know the answer to that question. John, have any idea?
And I think I saw that came from a member of the Brandywine School Board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll have to look into that. I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but it'd be good information to get. So certainly look into that. And thank you to Ms. Pigeon for that question.
And then we have another question from Jeremiah. How much will this cost the taxpayer?
Yeah, so we got that question before. I mean, I think the question we talked about was our commitment to additional opportunity funding. To give you some idea, that goes to schools across the state. based on the enrollment of students from low-income backgrounds and English learners. And I think it was this year 38 million statewide, and it ramps up to 60 million over the next year or two. I'm looking for John for a nod. Additional resources through legislation that passed to provide additional support for counselors in schools, which will go again statewide. We have some resources that have been designated for the collaborative itself. I can't total it up how much is directly for this initiative, but I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of the additional funding and investment that we're making at the state level in education is for our children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And the reason is, we talked about opportunity funding earlier, is the fact that we have what we call an opportunity gap that's going to affect the future of the children that aren't able to be successful as they grow older in a more competitive world. I saw a hand going up over here.
Good evening. I have a question in reference to resources in reference to students with disabilities or intellectual disabilities. They have resources that are built into their IEP, but what if there's some circumstances that the IEP doesn't cover that would support the family? Because Harlan Elementary School is awesome. They just started a program to basically help the family of these special needs kids that can't go to regular daycare centers because they need supervision or because they have emotional needs that need to be met, or they may elope or whatever. What are you doing to address that? Because they were able to get a grant to recently help us before care and after school care. But going forward, how will this help other families?
So I think the question is around supports for families of the children in the collaborative. And of course, one of the things that Delaware does quite well and has for a number of years is to provide additional funding for the school district for children with disabilities. In fact, one of the legislation that just passed in the last General Assembly was to provide funding for basic special education for K to 3, something that we didn't have before. But we have significant funding for children with significant intellectual disabilities that goes along with the funding formula. I'm not the expert to explain it, but essentially you get more money for fewer students by unit, right? So the unit count, I think, is about 15 or 17 on a regular student, and significantly less than that, so more resources for those children. The idea of providing additional financial support for families of the children that are in this district is something that makes sense, and something that we're doing anyway with in our MOU with Christina School District. Right now, we, in kind of repositioning their facilities, created an early childhood center on the first floor of Stubbs, the old Stubbs Elementary, and a parent support center on the second floor. So resources to help families address whatever the issues and challenges they face, from getting maybe their GED to other training, job opportunities, other social supports, so that helping that family will also help that child to be successful. So it's kind of fundamentally part of everything that we talk about in the collaborative, because the idea is to focus on the unique challenges of the families that are in the city of Wilmington in these districts. And we know that a significant number of them are experiencing homelessness, as we've heard, and experiencing other social problems.
Governor, we have a question from YouTube. Veda asked, I tuned in late, so can you please just summarize the collaboration again?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the...
Veda tuned in late and was wondering if you could summarize what the collaborative is.
Whoa. I would summarize it this way. This is an effort to provide greater collaboration, so greater cooperation across the city of Wilmington, with a hyper-focus on those children and their families, to provide the kind of support that teachers and the families and students need to be successful. It's addressed really to make sure that our children can meet those standards that you're talking about so that they can be successful later on in junior high and high school and in life in general. Part of its purpose is to address some of the challenges that have been created historically with the system or the fragmented system that we have in schools serving the city of Wilmington children. That's how I don't know, that's a great short summary, but we had, Mr. Holler had it.
Good evening, Lincoln Holler, Superintendent of the Brandywine School District, and also a former teacher and principal right here at Harlan Elementary. So Harlan has a special place in my heart, and I want you to know as parents and community members that that active interest in Harlan is only going to grow stronger through this process. We are approaching this with cautious optimism. We know that we have to do something different. And to your point, I wanted to jump up and high-five you. It's more. When we say Wilmington Collaborative, it's going to be more than just the schools and the teachers doing something. That collaborative has to expand into the parents. We're going to need active, supportive parents and community members. We all have to reinvest in our students and come up with a different solution if we're going to bridge those gaps and cover those holes and give our students the best opportunity they deserve. So thank you for your comments tonight. And I want to say thank you to everyone here this evening. Tough time of the year to come out. We know that with the holidays right around the corner. And for the governor to make a special trip out, it speaks volumes to his interest in our children. So I want to thank him. I also want to thank the members of his team for setting up that virtual field trip where we got to visit several different examples of types of collaboratives that we can start to think through. What are those critical pieces? What are those details from the parent perspective, the teacher perspective, the district perspective, the community perspective, so that when we do build something, whatever that is, whatever it comes out to be, it's in the best interest of children. And as long as they remain our focus and our intent is to improve, we're going to succeed and they're going to succeed. So thank you, Governor, on behalf of the Brandywine School District. And I know Ms. Roberts wanted to say just a few words.
Thank you, Superintendent Holler. Thank you, Governor, for being here. We do appreciate you sharing and taking time to share this information with us. Parents, I am so grateful for you coming and for you sharing your children with us each and every day. As the superintendent shared, the governor and everyone else, we are dedicated to your children, and that's why I thought it was important for you to be here, to get this information firsthand. It's one thing for me to say it or for you to hear it on my Sunday messages, which I know are long, but it's another thing for you to hear it right from the governor. And so there's more information that's coming that we'll be learning about, and so that information will be shared with you through the Sunday messages, through Class Dojo, but we'll also have in-person forums where you can come and ask questions as well. If you ever have any questions about what's happening in Harlan, you know we are open and honest, and hopefully you feel comfortable coming to us. But we're so grateful that you came tonight. Your children have had fun. So I'm telling you, they've had snacks, they've done arts and crafts, and they even saw Santa. All right, so Santa was here. So you can go ahead and have your walk home or drive home and just know that they've had a good time, and they should be ready to go to sleep so that they can come to school on time tomorrow, ready to learn. And we have just one day tomorrow, so we're going to make it a fun day here as they're learning and preparing for the winter break. So thank you all for being here. Your students are, we'll be calling for them shortly on the walkie-talkie, so we'll be calling them by grade level to walk up to you so that you don't have to walk and get them. But again, thank you for coming, and we'll continue to share all information about this and everything else with you. Thank you again.
Amen. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday. God bless you all. Have a great night. At least the kids had fun, right?